Good morning, everyone. I know we still got some folks joining, but we'll go ahead and get started. I know we're just a few minutes behind here due to some technical difficulties, but I am Emily Young with NC Tech. Thank you for joining us for this morning's Cybersecurity Network meeting on cybersecurity in a remote environment. We are so excited to bring you an incredible panel this morning. Just a few housekeeping items. If you could submit any questions that you have for our panel in the Q&A window that you see on your screen. We will save some time at the end there for some questions. Make sure you include any of those questions as we go along, and we'll get to those at the end of our program. If you have any other issues, technical, or have any questions for me, you can reach out through the chat function. And I am very excited to introduce to you Derek Kelly, who will be our moderator this morning from Lumen. Take it away, Derek.
Thanks, Emily, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Emily said, I'm Derek Kelly with Lumen, and we used to be called CenturyLink, but we're in the middle of rebranding our enterprise side of the house to Lumen Technologies, or Lumen for short. And again, I appreciate everyone coming this morning. Sorry for the tech troubles we had to start off. And we're going to do quick introductions, and then we can jump right into our questions. So Ann, do you want to start us off with introductions?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Ann Hungate from RTI International, where I am the head of technology. That includes, of course, the cyber team, infrastructure operations, service, data analytics, and support. And look forward to participating in the panel today.
Chuck?
Good morning, everyone. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Pendo, and I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to joining Pendo, I was also Chief Information Security Officer at Duke Health. So again, very happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. Chris?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Beal. I'm the Vice President of Security Initiatives and Chief Information Security Officer at MCNC. For those that don't know us, MCNC is a nonprofit based in Research Triangle Park, and we do a lot of work around connectivity and technology services for education in North Carolina, K-12 schools, community colleges, and other higher ed as well, and research institutions and those kind of folks. So super excited to be here, part of the discussion this morning. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. And Shankar?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shankar Chebrolu. I'm Director of Security Architecture at Red Hat. Red Hat is part of IBM now. We are headquartered in Raleigh. I've been with Red Hat for about 6 years. I've worked for Cisco and Adobe before that in the security area, of course, security architect. I focus on security architecture reviews, risk assessments, privacy impact assessments, awareness sessions, security standards and guidelines at Red Hat. Looking forward to participate in this panel today.
Thanks, Shankar. And I'm going to actually come back to you with our first question. So if anyone wasn't aware, back in March, our whole world sort of changed and most of us had to shift to remote work and work at home. Tell us a little bit about the challenges you or your organization faced and just any success you achieved in making this shift.
So, fortunately, Red Hat were uniquely one of those companies who are uniquely positioned to weather the sudden global pandemic that was imposed on us to work from home remotely. We were prepared in such a way that every employee, when they join, regardless of where they are global, we're a global organization. We have all over the offices all over the place. Raleigh being headquarters, we have a huge campus in Westford and in Europe, Australia. But most of all the employees were given a remote access on the day one, right? Nothing to do with this pandemic. With securely or VPN with multi-factor authentication. At any given day, in fact, we have about 30 to 35% of the employees are 100% remote. They globally, they are placed globally. There are a lot of people that I know work 2 hours, stay or live 2 hours away from Raleigh office. They never open up, and they come in once in a month or once in a year. And about 10 to 15% of the people work from home, even though they're not 100% remote. People like me, I live about 20 miles from Raleigh. And on every Friday I work from home. 60% of the time I work from home. So because of that, it did not come as a shock to most of us. Like 45% of the people are so used to work from home. Having said that, yeah, we have about 50% of the people, more than that, and probably some of them go into office every day, like legal and some of the engineering people who needs to be in the engineering labs in the building to work to do their work. So we had ample VPN resources, ample infrastructure resources for people to connect remotely securely, but we made a lot of upgrades to those infrastructure just in case. Communicated to them, started posting documents and blog posts, reaching out to people via email, how to securely configure their home network. This is probably the first time that many people invested in a wireless router or upgraded their wireless infrastructure at home. So we published document or pushed content to them, making sure that they know how to securely configure their home network now that they're working 100% of the time, for foreseeable future. We don't know when this is going to end. As simple as, changing their admin passwords on their wireless routers, upgrading their firmware if it's an old router, things like that. In addition to providing company laptops, we always supported employees using their personal devices or their personal laptops and other devices to access Red Hat network using the same VPN two-factor authentication based setup. But then those don't necessarily come up with all the corporate security builds or corporate security services. So we reiterated and upgraded those documents, communicated, pointed them to follow those controls and procedures to secure their home laptops or personal laptops, like device encryption and enabling firewalls and data backups and so on and so forth. Most of it's reiterating what we've been doing for a long time. So we probably are one of those companies. My previous company that I worked for also fall into the same boat. Tech companies. There are a lot of people working from home. So the major challenge was in the engineering labs, I believe, because that's where I heard some issues there. But then Red Hat IT and networking infrastructure InfoSec team or security members jumped on it, made sure that they opened or enabled secure network access from home to those labs, to make sure that engineering people can continue. As you may know, Red Hat has a huge number of engineering folks. Red Hat sales folks, who are on the road all the time, anyway, work from home or remotely, I should say, client locations or whatever. So we didn't face any challenges there.
Hey, Derek, can I jump in? We had a different experience at RTI because we weren't a remote. We're not a technology firm, right? We have researchers. So our big change wasn't technology, it was communication and support. So one of the thing we had to do is be ready to answer questions. We had to beef up our help desk, right? And re-educate the workforce in a variety of ways. Some people like to read it. Some people like to be told. So we had that. And then on the other side, our executive leadership team was more interested now in technology and the efficacy and the security than ever before. So we had to start adding readouts to the executive leadership team. So things they'd taken for granted, they now wanted to know more about. So those were two pretty significant changes at RTI.
And I'd actually like to add a couple of pieces of context from Pendo. So sort of like Red Hat, I mean, we're a technology company, and the shift from that standpoint was pretty straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit about zero trust later on in this. So I'm not going to kind of delve into that, but that definitely helped us because we've built our really our IT infrastructure on that concept. We're a cloud native company, so pretty much everything we already access remotely anyway, even if we're in the office. But sort of like Ann was saying, really what we were looking at were the cultural changes from the context of we do have a company culture that has been really built around an in-office experience. So we were worried in shifting that to a work from home model, could we maintain the same level of productivity, the same level of communication between our different teams? We recognized that we were going to have to, to adapt. And fortunately, that went pretty well. I think, I think, again, we have a later question to kind of delve into this a little bit in terms of how it actually long-term is going to affect us. But short-term, I think everybody, was able to still be highly effective working from home. And again, I think it's something that we just had to consciously nurture. We had to pay attention to how we were communicating with each other. And, I think the Zoom fatigue is I think that term has become pretty commonplace these days. Certainly something that we paid attention to as well. I think we found we were actually doing more meetings because we were remote, and having the cameras all the time definitely made people feel a little bit tired at the end of the day. So we've tried to be cognizant of that as well, and give maybe a few breaks so that we're not going through that exhausting experience of being on camera all day long.
Thanks. Good conversation. So Chris, when we talk about sending everyone home and the majority of our workforce is being remotely, does that just give the bad guys more opportunity for security incidents? Can you just share what experiences you've seen over the last 6 months and how you mitigate those threats?
Absolutely. So MCNC, our organization, is relatively small, and as others have described here, we were already pretty well positioned for our employees to be able to work remotely. So we didn't, for our organization, see a major shift, but we definitely have seen problems and issues in the community that we serve in the education space. March, when schools were very, very quickly trying to figure out how to enable remote learning and remote working, we saw a number of security challenges. Every organization is challenged with staffing around and resourcing around technology and security, but it's a particularly acute challenge in the education community. So we saw environments where schools very, very quickly were trying to figure out how to take systems and applications that were never designed to be accessed away from the school building, and on a dime, figure out how to give everyone access. So we saw a lot of decisions that were made that were probably not the smartest decision from a risk standpoint, but they had to be made quickly to figure out how to enable access. So we saw firewall rules that were opened up to allow access, from the internet directly to systems that were never designed to be exposed to the internet. We saw remote desktop being exposed directly to the internet as a way to facilitate access. And those certainly increased risk profiles, and in some cases led directly to ransomware incidents that we had to help come in and clean up. So those were some pretty significant challenges straight away. And then also we saw a whole lot of systems that, for most of their existence had been safely encased inside the corporate perimeter and protected from all that bad stuff out on the internet that very, very quickly were released into the wild. And a lot of those systems were not prepared to deal with the onslaught of attacks that were going to be coming at them. So that was another area where we saw a lot of folks struggling to figure out how to protect those, how to keep them protected, how to get visibility into them now that they're out on someone's home network and they can't connect back into the infrastructure that was designed to keep them patched and keep them updated and monitor them. So those were some of the challenges that we saw in our community and had to help folks work through.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think Shankar touched on this earlier. One issue I've seen, and although fortunately we haven't personally experienced this that much at Pendo, but certainly talking to colleagues, I've seen the issue around personal devices, the BYOD model, kind of jumping into that feet first without having the security controls in place. But, kind of a companion piece to that, I think people, we're dealing with cognitive overload right now. We have so much stuff going on in the world, so many stressful situations that are sitting right in front of us. It just makes people that much more susceptible to being phished, whether that be through the traditional email routes or, through phishing or smishing, voice phishing and text message phishing, or social media. I think that's something that just in terms of the threat landscape has shifted significantly. People are just more susceptible to falling to things right now because we are so overwhelmed with the amount of information we're dealing with, and a lot of that information being stressful already. So if we get that, alert about, hey, you may have been exposed to somebody who has COVID, you might be a lot more likely to respond to that by clicking on a link or opening an attachment to find out more. So that's something we've tried to increase our security awareness efforts around, just to make sure people are being on the lookout for those types of attacks.
Hey, Chuck, can I jump back in on that point?
Yeah.
I want to say this. I know we probably have a lot of security folks or security-minded folks on the call today. And I was reminded of something earlier this week that I think is pretty important for us to keep top of mind. And it has to do with that point you were just talking about with cognitive overload and understanding where our folks are right now. I know that something that's popular with a lot of folks is the idea of doing phishing tests and kind of, self-phishing our population to try to teach people about good behaviors. I was shown something earlier this week of a phishing test, phishing simulation at an organization where the phishing message was sent to the employee population, and they chose to use as their example sending termination letters to folks telling them they had been terminated because of COVID. And that was their test to try to get people to see if they would click on a phishing link. And that's that kind of behavior from technology folks and security folks does not engender trust. So I just want to encourage us all to be very, very mindful of where our employees are at, and being responsible and taking care of them. That's should always be top of mind. And
Chris, you're spot on. We had 2 backfires with phishing attempts, and so now I actually pre-read all the notes before the team sends them out. But we had one that was socially insensitive, and we had another one right after benefits enrollment about you missed the enrollment deadline. You have no benefits for the year, and they caused panic, and that panic led to disruption. It led to loss of productivity, complaints. These phishing exercises are really important, but you got to proofread. If you're in charge of the space, you need to proofread this and maybe get a friend from HR to help you with some sensitivity awareness. Because as a technologist, we're not always the most sensitive.
I couldn't agree with more with those points. In fact, there was a very public outing, I think just this past week. There was a kind of a tweet storm around a phishing exercise that I think Tribune Publishing had done, where they'd previously just done a bunch of layoffs in the prior weeks, and so all of a sudden now there's this phishing attack around, or simulated phish around bonuses. Hey, here's some good news for you. We're going to give everybody a bonus. So just that caused a lot of cultural issues within the company. That kind of spilled over into social media, made Tribune Publishing look really bad. Also made the provider of that service, I think it was KnowBe4, look pretty bad as well. So I 100% agree. We need to be very conscious of those sorts of things. We could certainly probably do a whole session on that particular subject. My feeling is, it's always possible to construct a phish that somebody is going to fall for. And so we don't actually run a program like that right now, but if I did, I would focus more on things that are, let's not try to really, really fool people. Let's put some more obvious things up there that people should be catching. You're always going to be able to construct something that somebody will fall for, and I'm not sure that really adds much to the conversation. But certainly if you have somebody who's just generally not paying attention, maybe you can do something around that. But yeah, I agree. This is a very sensitive area. It needs careful thought in terms of how you construct that.
You know what I think might be more productive in most organizations, and I actually first started doing this, almost 20 years ago when I started working in this space, is we do personal security awareness training. So we help people manage and monitor their own credit report and learn about their own personal vulnerability. That spills over into the workplace. And I think that's way more effective than disruptive phishing emails that cause panic.
Yeah, and I think especially today where our work life and our personal life is just naturally blended because we're working at home. I agree that philosophy of trying to put what we're talking about for security awareness at work into the context of how you can apply the same sorts of things in your personal life. For example, using multi-factor authentication. That was something when we launched MFA at Duke Health, I think back in 2015, we really emphasize, hey, this is important for our organization, but you should think about using this technology on your personal accounts as well. And here's why. Here's why this can be a great way to protect, for example, your personal finances or your social media. So yeah, I think there's always a parallel we can draw, and that's very helpful when we do that.
Thanks. And I see we have one question in the Q&A, and I promise we'll save some time at the end for those. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put those in, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So Chuck, you had mentioned sort of the phrase zero trust earlier. Can you just explain what that term means when it comes to remote work, and are you a fan of it or not?
Yeah, again, that's probably a topic we could spend a whole session on here. Sort of simply put, the way I look at zero trust is just assuming that your devices are living in a hostile network. And again, if I go back to Pendo being a fairly young company, a cloud native company where all of our resources do literally sit in the cloud, we consume all of our corporate IT as software as a service and platform as a service type offerings. We kind of built from that perspective that our office network is not something that is really inherently trusted. Just because you're sitting in the office network, you're not going to automatically be granted access to certain resources, as opposed to throughout most of my career, if you were sitting inside of a corporate IT network, you might have access to all sorts of file servers and internet servers and things like that aren't meant to be exposed to the external world. So, for me, that zero trust perspective is just, is basically that. I'm kind of pivoting to focusing my controls on the endpoint and the user identity as the way to ensure that, access is structured appropriately. Again, kind of looking at how that helped us in this move to work from home. Picking up your laptop from your desk and moving to your home network, hey, you know what? All the security controls I have really built are focused on the endpoint and the identity. So they apply the same way as if you're sitting at home as they would apply sitting in the office. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. Again, I could talk for a long time about that, but that's my perspective and why I'm a huge proponent of zero trust. You definitely have to think carefully about that transition, but it can be very helpful if you can do that.
I think, Chuck, I'm also a huge proponent because I think zero trust is more important now than ever as for global companies, right? Because we can't always control the backbone. But if we can get security all the way out at the endpoints and secure at the finest level, then I think we're gonna have better success for global organizations.
And I would say, going back to the previous question, talking about some of the challenges that we saw within organizations that were very quickly trying to figure out how to enable access for folks that had never been designed to do that. This kind of zero trust model eliminates the notion of providing access based on, as Chuck said, the network that I'm connected to, and it's really all about. It doesn't matter where you are, based on your user identity or whatever properties you want to associate with the decision. That's the criteria that's used to facilitate access. So it's about giving access to applications and not networks. And that would have been eminently helpful for these folks who were very quickly trying to figure out how to go remote. And it also significantly improves your security posture because, when the network, as it were, the internal network does become exposed in some way, that exposure is very, very limited, right? If you have a device that went remote and got compromised and then came back either via VPN or someone coming back into an office and plugging in, and now, suddenly they're on the inside, well, that doesn't really matter anymore, right? Just because they're on the inside, they don't have any more access than they did when they were outside. So it's a pretty important concept to really kind of moving forward into the future of how we facilitate access securely.
Thanks. So Anne, have the threats that or the type of threats you've seen changed since we went to remote work? Has your incident response plan changed at all?
Well, the type of threats we see hasn't changed, but the volume has increased. We had a huge increase in phishing and other email-related threat attempts. But we have great controls out of the perimeter, so we're able to capture them. But to monitor the volume coming at us, that increased significantly. We have matured our incident response plan though as a result. First, I mean, Chuck talked about the difference when you could all come together, right? And you talk face to face. Our incident response plan is now completely distributed. So how do we remotely get people together and create that sense of urgency and that cohesive response? We also have expanded the number of partners available to us. Because you know, a lot of times you want extra third-party help, and because other organizations are having increased volume, we want more response. So we've got more partners that help us. So we changed the threats haven't changed, but the volume has increased. We changed our incident response to be able to enable remote communication and to create that sense of urgency remotely, and we've increased the number of providers. And this is just a shout out. There are a lot within the state of North Carolina. There are a number of great niche firms that can help you, you know, throttle up and down your capacity in this space if you need it. And they're great relationships to build. I think it's good for the whole tech community.
Shankar, I'll pose the same question to you from a Red Hat perspective. You know, are you guys seeing the type of threats changing since you've gone to remote work, or more remote work in your case?
You may be surprised to hear from me that no, we actually the threats. You know, I was talking to a lead incident response engineer earlier. We did not see any change in the number or the type of threats coming in, especially, you know, definitely not the successful attacks. There may be, we're probably receiving more phishing emails, just like everybody else. But fortunately, the success rate of those phishing attacks didn't change. So we did not update the incident response as due to this pandemic. We actually matured our incident response plan. You know, started 3 years back or so, way before the pandemic. You know, which helped us to be more prepared, I guess. We go through the annual incident response plan changes or annual updates, tabletop exercises, training to the relevant people who participate in the incident response, you know, InfoSec, legal, and other security teams. So as due to this COVID-19 situation or global pandemic and people working from home, we do not have any numbers to say that the number of threats or successful attacks increased on us. But we increased, so incident response is on the reactive side of it, right? So, but we increased side of the security stuff in increasing the training, increasing the communication, increasing the publications or documents or you know, newsletters, awareness sessions, more tuned and to be more relevant to the current situation. Maybe that helped. But we are constantly, you know, monitor the industry, what's going on. We definitely have seen the phishing attacks happening, and then due to this situation, you know, we share those news items religiously within InfoSec team and outside to be, you know, more prepared. But you know, fortunately, we didn't have to deal with those real incidents because of, you know, probably more investment on the proactive side of things for the last several years. And especially the incident response plan has been matured, and we worked with the new vendor, and we're doing annual updates and training and tabletop exercises for the last 3-4 years, which I think helped us prepared going into this pandemic that was imposed on us.
I would like to jump in there as well. I mean, I think like Shankar, we haven't necessarily seen a significant change in the types of threats or, you know, the volume of threats. Certainly phishing still probably is the most prominent one. And I think the numbers have actually stayed relatively constant, maybe slight increases, but, you know, not anything significant. But where it has shifted our perspective a little bit, this is a slight tangent, but just again, being a fairly young company, 7 years old, obviously things like business continuity planning when you're a startup are not things that you're spending a lot of time thinking about. But it is something that we had started thinking more about actually late last year. And when we saw what was coming, the pandemic news that started hitting the press in January and February, it really kind of piqued our interest in terms of, okay, are we really prepared for something that could have a huge impact, not just on our technology, but really on how we work? So actually, the folks in the security team, we were actually kind of thinking about that ahead of our executives, and it ended up being good because we had started documenting, collecting some data points from some of our peers in terms of how they were preparing for a pandemic. Yeah, it has actually really shifted our perspective on business continuity planning. Again, a shift that it was already underway, recognizing where we were in our growth path, that we needed to be spending more thinking about that, not just from a technology perspective, but truly from our business process perspective. And that has paid dividends, that we've had that additional focus.
Yeah, I want to jump back in and reiterate some of what you said. We've been moving towards SaaS business solutions, like Workday, for example, is just one of them, away from the on-premise home back office solutions, so which have more availability SLAs and higher resiliency. So that helped, I think, on the business side as well.
I'll jump in and say one of the things that we have seen shift within the community that we work with, particularly the education community, is maybe the volume or the type of threats haven't changed significantly, but the impact has changed a lot. So if you think about, from an education standpoint, the traditional model of education delivery, students in a classroom, teacher there to teach. If the underlying technology disappeared or went down, you may have had an online lesson or something that involved use of technology, but recovery was a lot simpler, right? The teacher could still teach the students right there in the classroom. Now, all of that relies completely on the technology being there with remote instruction. If something impacts the technology, right, it's all disrupted. And the recovery is not nearly as simple. So that is a way that, one small example of how we've seen the impact change significantly, and that has forced folks to shift their thinking about the continuity planning. How do I, make sure that I'm capable of still conducting the mission that now relies much more heavily on this set of things than we were relying on it previously.
Yeah, I want to jump back in there, kind of thinking back to my days at Duke Health. That was certainly a big focus for us as well. It's interesting to have seen the shift that healthcare made to technology very quickly over really kind of the early 2000s to the, kind of mid 2010s, I guess, if you will. Very quickly became dependent upon technology. But, I think most people probably saw there was a huge ransomware outbreak that affected the UHS health system over the past few days. And it sort of emphasizes that you do still need to be able to fall back to those non-technology processes for those critical functions like healthcare. So yeah, you do need to think about what are those alternatives. Outside of if you lose all your technology, how can you keep your business still functional? The other thing I wanted to jump back to in terms of our own contemplation of business continuity is just, again, people. As a newer company, 450 people, we really are dependent upon some key individuals. So I think that was, reflecting upon the pandemic and how that could potentially affect our staff. If somebody got sick, for example, and if we lost a key individual, or even worse, multiple key individuals for either a short period of time or hopefully not, to a death, but that's certainly a possibility. So it was something that we kind of brushed under the covers previously, thinking, well, that's a pretty low likelihood something like that could happen. But the pandemic really has shown a light on that yeah, we do need to pay attention to those types of dependencies in our people as well.
And Chuck, to go along with that, some of our on-site support, one of the things we did right away was move into squads, right? We broke our team into 3 squads. And so they don't have contact with each other. So if we need folks on site, it's, this squad's on this 2 weeks, and that way we reduce the likelihood of losing all our key people. it's something that we had never thought about before, but immediately got into our business continuity plan.
Good conversation. So, Chris, earlier we were talking sort of about Zoom fatigue, and with just the increase of all these meetings on Zoom and WebEx like this and Teams, how have they impacted security plans?
So certainly within the education community, you've probably seen all kinds of stories about folks having to learn very quickly how to use some of these tools for remote instruction that maybe weren't really designed for that or weren't implemented in a manner that made that easy or effective. So we did a lot of work with folks early on to have them think about proper configurations for these tools. So, to prevent things like Zoom bombing or students being able to take over classrooms and distribute inappropriate messages or information. But that's something that we did a lot of work with the community to help them understand, okay, here's all the settings that are available to you. Here's recommended settings and why you want to set them this way, which problems they help you solve, and getting those in place. But another thing that I think is challenging from a security standpoint is, you might be using WebEx as your platform. That's what your company uses. And so you think, okay, well, I've got WebEx secured and locked down, so I don't have to worry anymore. But chances are that folks in your organization need to communicate with folks at other organizations using these tools, and they might not use WebEx. They might use Zoom, or they might use Google Meet, or whatever the next one is. And so it's not just understanding the one that you have, it's also understanding all the ones that everyone else has and making sure that your employees know the settings there and the right behaviors in all those platforms. And so that's a challenge to think about as well. But I always like to come back to positives, and I think that there's a lot of positives from a security standpoint with being able to continue conducting business, and these tools enable that in a fabulous way. Certainly there are drawbacks to doing that, as we've talked about with fatigue and not wanting to be on these platforms all day, every day. But they have enabled us to continue doing our business and continue interacting with our teams in a richer way than just talking on the telephone. So I think there's a lot of security benefit to these tools as well. And I don't want to lose sight of that as we're getting into the conversation.
Yeah, I want to say two things on this topic myself. First thing is we actually increased the tools from 1 to 2, the remote video conferences or meetings, right? And as part of availability, as part of the CIA, security is not just about always confidentiality and integrity of data, right? But even though the primary video conferencing tool that we use, it meets SLAs, but we just want to be proactive, just in case. We already use, other vendor for our corporate email and stuff like that. So we enabled additional services from the secondary vendor to make sure that, and gave some guidance around, hey, when to use which tool. Just that way we divided, we have 19,000 employees. So we divided the workload across 2 different vendor solutions for video conferencing rather than relying on one. Just in case if one goes down, that's a huge productivity impact. That is one. The second one I wanted to say is, in the middle of all this, there are several requests from various organizations like marketing, sales, to enable Zoom, which we were not using before, because they like some of the features in Zoom. But exactly around that time, there was an FBI warning and some incidents around Zoom, security incidents in the press. So we had to decline that request at the time until those issues were fixed several weeks and months later, and then we enabled or approved those teams to select those select 2 teams to selectively use Zoom for a specific use case. So that actually made it third tool in the enterprise to use for certain use cases.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there as well. I want to emphasize the business continuity aspect of this that Shankar was pointing out, and this was something we explicitly contemplated in our BCP. Our primary tools at Pendo for communication are Slack and Zoom. So we did contemplate, okay, if we lost one or both of those tools, how could we continue communication? So our first thing to do was to look at what are the other tools that kind of come along with other platforms we're already using. We're also a G Suite shop, so Google Meet was the obvious. Okay, here's a fallback that we already have. We could potentially use if, for example, Zoom went down. So we made sure to document that and make sure we know how to to use Google Meet if we need to. So yeah, I agree 100%. We need to pay attention to the availability aspect of not just our own infrastructure, but the availability of some of these third-party tools that we depend upon. And fortunately, actually, Teams, I think Office 365 had a huge outage yesterday. So I mean, these things are going to happen. Fortunately, usually when they happen, they only last a few hours. But you do need to be prepared, especially if you have something urgent that you might have to be dealing with. For example, if you have an incident yourself you're dealing with in the middle of one of these tools going down, you need to have thought through that before you encounter that situation.
No, you are on mute there.
Wow, I'm still learning how to use my tools as well. So the question from the audience is not as much cyber as maybe cultural, but what are the longer term consequences from work from home, and are they still emerging? Example, what about the loss of mentoring opportunities or the vibrancy of office environment, or opportunity and distance from family and to enable focus and concentration at work? And then I'll sort of piggyback that into a cyber one if anyone wants to sort of look at the crystal ball and what do you see as the future of remote work and if cyber strategies are having to shift along with that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on this one as well. I think it's an interesting question, something we've thought a lot about at Pendo, but also I've talked with a lot of my peers, particularly West Coast peers, around how they're viewing the shift around work from home versus office. And it's interesting to see, there are a lot of companies that really have made explicit statements saying, we are going to either move to a permanent work from home model or at least an indefinite work from home model, and really allow people to make that choice as to where they're going to work from. And other companies that are what we really value our office culture, and we think that that's an important part of who we are. I personally think that there's going to have to be a balancing act between these two things. I think you can't ignore the fact that there will be more work from home in the future. And top talent, there are going to be people who are going to be, very adamant about, what, I would love to work for you, but I'm only going to do that if I'm able to work from home. So I think that's, and that could be, certainly our cyber talent could be part of that, because we all know how hard it is to hire good people in IT security. So, certainly we need to be cognizant of how we're going to incorporate somebody, if we're going to have a remote or hybrid workforce where some people are in the office and some people are remote, we have to make sure that we bring them in on equal footing. I think that's been a real challenge for organizations in the past that have tried to do that. It usually ends up being that one culture wins out over the other, and usually it's the office culture that wins out, and remote workers end up feeling like second-class citizens. But I do think this is sort of pushing us towards a world where we do have to kind of figure that out and make sure that we are including remote workers in the same way that we have. At the same level that we include our office workers. That's just my personal read of the crystal ball, just looking at, again, where I think talent is, there's going to be top talent that's going to work remotely. And if you want to be able to take advantage of that top talent, you're going to have to be able to incorporate them into your workforce and still maintain your culture.
And I think a lot of folks are finding that they're more productive at home than they thought they could be. But when they do want to come into the office, whether it's for maybe a collaboration session or they need to check, get away from the family because there's something going on at the house, offices are going to have to consider things like hoteling space, just things we never thought about before. What equipment do you provide? How do you sanitize these spaces? How do you check in? It's going to continue to evolve. But I'm with Chuck. This pandemic is accelerating our move towards these distributed and hybrid work environments.
Yeah, I agree. More and more people will continue or increase their hours working from home. I can speak for myself. I used to go 2 times a week before. Now, when things go back to normal, when they go back to normal, we all don't know when. I probably will go 2 times a month, not 2 times a week, because I am as productive from home, as in office. But to the question of mentoring opportunities, I think we can do that virtually as well, right? Definitely, there is some loss of not meeting people in person, because people are more careful to say things on video, but, rather than in a hallway or in a break room, or when they go out to a restaurant. But I think more and more people will continue to work from home or increase working from home. And for the security aspect of it, people are forced to learn or train themselves to do that securely, which they were probably not doing before, upgrading their laptops and, patching them, and trying to be careful what links they click on, things like that. But I think there are several advantages of working from home, as long as you're as productive as possible. You don't need to sit in the traffic, 1 hour time, miles, gas. You can save stuff. So I think more people will continue to work from home.
Yeah, for me, the technology and the cyber aspects of it are much more straightforward. That doesn't mean they're easy, but I think there's a much clearer understanding of, if we want to enable that, then we have to make that transition. But we understand mostly what those look like. I think the comments about the cultural stuff and those are, for me, much more challenging, right? And like a lot of things in the world, the technology is the easy part, the people are the challenging part. But the potential benefits of figuring that out and tapping into it and taking advantage of it are significant. I mean, enabling productivity that wasn't there before, freeing up resources that can be invested in other areas. It's exciting to think about, how this transformation will change us and enable us to do things that we couldn't do before. So I think it's certainly challenging and exciting at the same time.
So we are running down to the last few minutes, and I think the next question from the audience sort of ties into some of our zero trust conversation. But how do you prepare for the risk that could be introduced when employees start to return back to the office, and if they have just sort of relaxed themselves with some of their security policies? So does anyone want to chime in on a short comment on that?
I think it's really important to encourage our team members not to relax their security policy. I have within arm's reach my shredder, right? Don't, just because you're at home, security policies and practices are still in play. Have a clean desk policy. Keep your files locked up. Don't change, because people could come into your home working. Kids could inadvertently walk away from things. Dumpster diving continues to be a real thing. So don't relax your security policies just because you're from home.
Yeah, and I would just go back to the statement that I think, Ann, you were making earlier about tying security to your personal life. So, again, my hope is that it's not a change, that people are actually increasing their security at home because they're starting to recognize how these two things are connected. So that will move you back into, returning to the office as well.
Yeah, I think go ahead.
One of the areas is people working from home probably are using sticky notes with their passwords all over the place. So going back to Ann's point of clean desk policy, that is one area where people, might practice when they go back to work. So we need to make sure that enterprises or companies provide something like a Bitwarden or other password tools to enforce or make it as a habit, not to write passwords on sticky notes, use it religiously, the password or password management tools.
Great. Well, we got through that a little too quick. So does anyone have any, just final parting thoughts on our conversation this morning? We have about 2 minutes.
I can throw something out. For me, my approach to security is to generally try to be very positive and find opportunities. And so I would just encourage folks to do that. Yes, there are some very significant challenges that we're all facing as a result of the pandemic and how we respond to that. But with those challenges come opportunities for improvement. So always be on the lookout for those, and always be on the lookout for finding ways that things are changing for the good and how they're improving things going forward. And especially in the security space, how do we take advantage of this thing to get better and improve.
Great. And we just had one more question. If anyone can answer in a minute or less, what password management tools do you all use or recommend?
We use Bitwarden at Red Hat. All the previous companies that I work, they use different tools. So see what's the best out there right now.
Yeah, I was actually trying to, for some reason, it wasn't letting me send this response in the chat, but yeah, typically, there's not a one size fits all. I typically recommend look for one of the big players. They usually are pretty well vetted. LastPass, 1Password, KeePass. I know a lot of our more technical users like that one. Bitwarden, open source solution, a lot of people like as well. So those are all ones that I recommend. Big issue is just make sure you keep them updated, because there are always vulnerabilities that need to be addressed at some point.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you to our panelists this morning for taking time out of their day, and for everyone else that joined. We have about a minute left, so I'm going to turn it back over to Emily to close this out.
Thank you so much, and what a great discussion, and definitely a lot of thoughts that I was nodding along to, and definitely appreciate your insights on. I just wanted to take a moment to thank our Cybersecurity Network sponsors, our presenting sponsor Lumen, and our many supporting sponsors you see here. With you all and your support, we're able to bring these amazing discussions and insights to everyone in our membership. So thank you so much, and I'll leave you with just a parting thought. We are rapidly approaching the NC Tech Awards, which is hard to believe. Here we are at the end of September. So if you want to head over to our event calendar, we have a page there with some updated information. The format will be new this year. It will be virtual. More details are coming soon, but you can view the sponsor menu. It'll give you a little idea of some of the things that we have that are going to be different. And we're looking forward to celebrating this year as different and unique as it has been. Still so much to celebrate here in North Carolina. So thank you again to our sponsors, to all of our attendees. We'll make this recording available shortly, within a day or so. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and week. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.